So it's a pleasure for me and an honor to introduce this first panel, which is dedicated to border forensic, that is at the convergence of two key issues for me. On one hand, what we can call border regime analysis and the production and the management of the border violence, militarization, externalization, etc. On the other hand, the issue of death in migration or by migration, between the practical support to families and the analysis and the spatialization of the event that generate death or disappearance. If the path and the trajectory of migration are complex, dangerous in general because of the material condition in which they take place, is evident, mapping the case of violence, death in migration or disappearance, that the borders are the areas where these events occur most frequently and produce the greatest number of victims. This is also due to physical dimension of the border and the consequent weaponization of landscape, but more to the structural functioning of the border regime. Academics and civil society have investigated and continue to investigate the functioning of the border regime, its variable geometry, the form of exception it contains, and the form of right violation it tolerates or produces. We'll see that in the border, Mexican-US border, there's more tolerance about, anyway. So the essential tools of intervention of the civil society actors, association, NGOs, etc., supported by the researcher and legal experts, has for years been the use of law as a tool to defend rights of migrant people, but in a context of normative action, reaction, and on a work of collecting testimonies. In recent years, on one hand, the opacity of the border space has progressively increased. But on the other hand, the evolution of technical capabilities of analysis, together with the ease of producing images or geolocalization and other forms of testimony through, for example, the smartphone. Let's ask why in Italy the new security law wants to prevent asylum seekers from having SIM cards, has allowed the production of data capable of describing and reconstructing situation of potential violation of law and violence. If the term of forensic fundamentally qualifies a scientific method utilized by, or to answering legal or judicial question, the corollary has generally been that these techniques is within the competence of state or sometimes supranational authorities, or used for, let's say, opinions, but framing in a standard procedure. In fact, as far as border death is concerned, in the context of the death can be generically imputed to the operation of border regime, forensic activities related to a case of death in migration or by migration to ascertain the causes of death, determine the responsibility and possibility to identify the victim remain the responsibility of the authorities. And hardly any family or civil society actors intervene. They don't have the margin to intervene, because the death or disappearance are often dismissed as accident, which assume a fairly significant level of trust in authorities. If the forensic monopoly remains with the authority as far as the dimension of forensic medicine is concerned, so autopsy, etc., we have witnessed in recent years an extension of the forensic domain, understood as the use to scientific techniques to research and investigate, to the horizon of research, journalistic investigation, or the activities of independent NGOs that equip themselves with methodology capable of documenting and reconstructing cases of violence and right violation that are ignored by authorities, or that see an implication, explicit or implicit, of the authority themselves, who always show a little reflexivity when it comes to judging and possibly punishing the illegal action of the agent. So the forensic dimension then becomes a form of counter-investigation, counter-narrative, and the denunciation capable of shedding light in a context such as the border regime, where the visibility is always lower. There are different genealogies that have led to the evolution of this critical forensic discipline, and we can remember the Equipo Argentina or the Antropologia Forense, created in 1984, up to Goldsmith Forensic Architecture Lab, created in 2010. As a border forensic, I had the possibility in 2012 to follow, between Boat for People and Watch the Med project, the work of forensic oceanography, was linked to the forensic architecture, on the case of the Left to Die boat, which through an accurate reconstruction showed how a boat was deliberately left adrift by the surveillance authority at sea, provoking the death of 63 people. Based on this reconstruction, and after 10 years of court battle, the involvement of family members, witness, and association, the case was reopened in France in 2022. The case of forensic oceanography is the one we focus on the most because of the number of problematic, the proximity here, the number of problematic events, but the forensic methodology has been applied to the different frontier border context. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce today Cristina del Biaggio, who is assistant professor at the Université de Grenoble-Alpes, who will tell us about the work done by the Border Forensic Association on the Blessing case in Briançon, so at the Italian-French border. I'll let you present your title. It's very long. And Camilla Fojas, is right? Fojas, sorry. Foundation professor and director of the School of Social Transformation at the Arizona State University, author of Border Optics, and she will present the situation of the US-Mexico border. I can read your title, whose media forensics of death in the US-Mexico border. So you are first, Cristina, please. Yes, as we respect the program, so you start first, 22 minutes. Okay, thank you.
So yeah, because you record, so I should take the mic. Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. I just followed a bit the work of your network in the last years, but online, and I'm in person here, so I could meet here people that I just had the chance to see on screen until now. So yeah, I'm sorry for the really, really long title that I won't read anymore, but actually with this paper, I will try to answer a quite, easy question. Who killed Blessing at the French-Italian border in 2018? And I will try to do it by disentangled responsibilities and try to deconstruct as well the discourse on risks. Just really shortly, the case. So I will start, as I said, to analyze the analysis with a specific case on which I worked in 2022 with some colleagues that I will name here, Sarah Bachellery, Charles Heller, and Lorenzo Pezzani from the agency Border Forensics. So the case is the case of the death of Blessing Matthew. On the 9th of May 2018, the body of a black woman, couple of days later identified as being Blessing Matthew from Nigeria, was discovered in the Durance River in France near the border with Italy. The quick identification had been possible thanks to the alarm that was given a couple of days before by Roland, one of the two Blessing's travel companions. And when Roland, it's really difficult to change in the French and English with the accents. When Roland reached the shelter in Briançon, he alerted the volunteers on site that after a chase by the police, he had no news of Blessing. Blessing was living in Torino for more than 1 year when she decided to leave Italy to France. She did the itinerary that hundreds of other people on the move use since 2015-2016. So she took a train from Torino to Ulx, then a bus until Clavière, and there she was hosted in a shelter that was called Chez Jésus. In the night between the 6th and the 7th of May, she left on foot the shelter with a group of 20 to 30 persons. The group broke up during the walk, and Blessing reached the village of La Vachette with two other fellows, Hervé and Roland, when the police tried to catch them. And when 2 days later the body of a black woman was found in the river, about 12 kilometers downstream from La Vachette, the link between the police chase and the body was made. And it is from there on where a really long legal battle began, which is actually quite over, but not completely over, let's say. You can see here, actually, the legal chronology that I would not comment here, but I just want to pay attention on a couple of elements. The first one is that in this whole process that lasted from 2018 to 2021, but as I said, that continues actually nowadays as well, there has only been a preliminary investigation that was carried out by judicial police. There was no trial. The main witness, Hervé, has never been heard by a judge, and an ab initio dismissal had been issued, which means that the public prosecutor, in the light of the preliminary investigations that was carried out following the complaint, decided that the acts denounced by the civil party were manifestly not committed. Second, the local NGO Tous Migrants has lodged a civil action, and by doing so, they had access to the criminal file. And it was actually through their notes out of the criminal file that the team of researchers, me included, and activists in the region carried out a counter-investigation to reconstruct the events that determined the death of Blessing. So the aim was to convince the prosecutor to reopen, depends how you see the thing, to open the case on the basis of new evidence that we try to collect. So in other words, and following Bennett and Layard, we became spatial detectives trying to understand what went wrong that morning in La Vachette, but as well by trying to uncover the patterns of systemic violence at stake. The team of researchers under the direction of the founders of the NGO called Board of Forensics used the forensic architecture approach to make investigation for Blessing's case. Briefly, even if Filippo just said a couple of words about, but the forensic architecture approach proposes to carry out investigations on cases of crimes and violence perpetrated by the state or public officials that act in the name of the state. And it has the aim to collect evidence and reveal the truth on violent events on which the state does not investigate. So one of the key elements of the approach, and this is particular interest here, is the fact that the cases investigated are never considered as isolated or due to fatality, but they are analyzed as part of what Eyal Weizmann, the founder of the approach, calls patterns. So as Weizmann says in his book, Forensic Architecture, Violence at the Threshold of Detectability, it is essential to demonstrate that an incident is part of repetitive patterns of similar violations, and that it occurs in a particularly space-time frame. And Weizmann continues by saying that mapping such patterns can help to establish what international lawyers call the widespread and systematic nature of the violations. For us, it was really important to keep this systemic dimension in mind for the investigation of Blessing. What did we do then? So first of all, we situated Blessing's case in time and space locally on the small region. As I said, Blessing died in May 2018, a moment in which tensions were particularly high in the region. Cases of violence, physical and verbal violence against migrants were documented daily, and particularly the months and the weeks before and after Blessing's death. The presence of people belonging to groups of the far right were present in the region, And I will come back to this later. Solidarity was highly criminalized, and the border had been strongly militarized, heavily patrolled on a large area well beyond the borderline. These elements have been summarized in the map that you can more or less understand and see, but this is actually the map to show the situation locally in the period when Blessing died. After having analyzed the local context, we decided to enlarge this analysis even more beyond the local situation by trying to understand if we could include Blessing's case in a larger system. We identified the Alpine mountain chain and the South Alpine border line or border zone as the pertinent system that could frame Blessing's death. Why does it make sense to have this region? Because concretely, migrants arriving either through the Balkan region as through the Central Mediterranean Sea, in their large majority, do not want to stay in Southern Europe, so they are obliged to cross the Alps in order to reach the countries of destination. Because theoretically as well, it was interesting to question the physical understanding of the mountain chain as a complex system of passage and obstacle. And because legally, the Alpine space got through a process of reborderization from 2015 onwards. The borderization of the Alpine territory occurred in different ways that I will not detail here, but it's known and studied by a number of researchers now. In this legal framework and the practices that it generated, the result in the systematic violence at stake at the Alpine borders, you can see it here. So statistics of fatalities at the Alpine borders that we produced seem to support the idea that it makes sense to take the Alpine region as the system in which Blessing's case is framed. So they show, the statistics, that 178 people died since 1993 trying to cross one of the Alpine borders. 74% of them occurred since 2015, so exactly when the Alpine countries decide to reintroduce systematic border controls at the borders. I tried to show by enlarging the scope of the border area, Alpine area, that the death of Blessing is not an isolated case, but the consequence of the migration regime that regulates the border passages of illegalized migrants since 2015. So I established a link between law and practices of control on one hand and space on the other at the regional macro level. What it is if we have a look at the micro geographical level now. So I propose to come back to the case of Blessing and to have a close look at the mission order that was given to the armed force present the morning when Blessing fell into the water. A mission that I defined as impossible, and I will try to explain you why. So in order to conduct our counter investigation, we found a key testimony, Hervé. Hervé, as I said, was a companion, travel companion of Blessing, and he saw Blessing falling into the water while he was hiding in a bush close to the river. Following Hervé's testimony, him, Blessing, and Roland have been intercepted by a squadron of the mobile gendarmerie when they tried to reach the village of La Vachette. The gendarmes chased the three fugitives through the village. One of them chased Blessing on foot all the way towards the riverbank. This operation has been framed in the mission that the state was given to the gendarmes, a mission that occurred in a particularly geohistoric context, as I will try to describe. In 2015, when the systematic border controls were introduced in France and in the other Alpine countries, about 30 agents from the border force were dislocated in Briançon. Nowadays, about 250 agents, with a majority of personnel from the army, are patrolling the area around Briançon. So this means that they are almost 9 times more than in just some years ago. And particularly interesting is what happened a couple of weeks before Blessing died. On the 21st of April 2018, a small group of identitarians organized what they called an Operation Defend Europe. You remember the one in Australia, right? In a spectacular operation, they decided to symbolically close the border. While this operation was mainly for show, in the following weeks, people from Génération Identitaire continued to patrol the region and support the police and border guards in search for people crossing the border irregularly, a kind of private militias, if you want, that have been convicted for illegal practice some months later. The following day, the transnational collective Briser les Frontières, breaking down borders, organized a counter-manifestation. About 300 people walked from Italy to France in solidarity with migrants, and some of them could cross the border on that occasion. The same day, Gérard Collomb, French Minister of the Interior at the time, published a press release where he states, "Important police and gendarmerie reinforcements will be deployed from this evening to assist the forces already present and to ensure that border control is fully respected." And it is from that moment that the two teams of the mobile gendarmerie arrived in the region. A new spatial legal regime was instaured in the valley. It is within this context that Blessing died. So within this spatial legal regime, it is interesting to have a look at the precise mission order that was given to the gendarmes. One thing seems obvious when looking at it: the contradictory situation in which they were and still are put by orders coming from above. An impossible mission, as I said, because the operation has the following objectives, and I'm reading them as they are written in the mission, in the letter they received. So 3, control the zone of the operation as part of the fight against illegal immigration, detect and, if possible, arrest migrant smugglers, contribute to maintaining law and order in the area. And at the same time, the following orders are as well given: not to put people in unnecessary danger, not to start a chase, not to corner fling people in a risky area, and it is forbidden to take ski slopes, snow-covered slopes, cross rivers or streams. So what is observable in the specific mission order in Briançon can be found more generally in discourses of politicians reported by media, but as well in official documents, such as the recent report that was published by the Court of Audit, the Cour des Comptes, which analyzes the regulation of border controls in France. In the report, one can read that French and European legislation seeks to combine the expression of national sovereignty in the choice of its immigration policies and at the one hand, and the protection of people's rights under the control of judges on the other. They say as well, this legal framework is constantly seeking to strike a balance. On the one hand, controlling immigration is an expression of national sovereignty, which decides whether or not to accept foreign nationals. And on the other hand, the fundamental rights of foreign nationals must be guaranteed. So, what happened the 7th of May 2018 while this spatial legal regime has been instaured? As we have seen, the case of Blessing's death had been declared inadmissible by the president of the Tribunal of Gap in June 2020. This means that the president considered that it has been manifestly established that the acts denounced were not committed. The decision has been based on the preliminary investigations carried out by the judicial police that interrogated the gendarmes present in La Vachette the morning when Blessing died. In the synthesis that had been sent to the Tribunal of Gap, upon which the decision was taken, contained no contradictions between the declarations of the 11 gendarmes that had been heard. The story, as told by the president of the tribunal in her decision, seemed to be coherent and logic. So the justification of the decision by the president to the Tribunal of Gap is quite astonishing, but highly geographical, and I quote the decision. he said, she, it's a woman, the contradictions between the various statements made by gendarmes do not appear to be relevant, given that each gendarme describes his intervention and his geographical position. So the problem is that exactly the intervention and the positions as described by the gendarmes are not solid when we confront them to the reality and to the materiality of this criminal scene, if you want. In fact, and thanks to the spatial-temporal reconstruction that we did and we provided of the declaration of the 6 gendarmes who chased the 3 fugitives, we could show that the coherent story related by the judicial police and taken for granted by the president of the Tribunal of Gap is not founded on any evidence. So what made sense on paper, it does not make any sense on site, and when confronting the discourse with the geography of the place. I'm almost finished. Huh? The narrative of the gendarmes is full of inconsistencies, but they are all careful in avoiding to mention actions that could make thinking that they were violating the formal directive. In the version of the story, they did not run, which is forbidden, the walk. They even affirmed that their action had been conducted so that they funneled the 3 fugitives away from the river. So they transformed themselves in rescuers, right? In their narrative, there is no mention on getting close to the river. A river which is, as a kayak instructor mentioned within the judicial inquiry, deadly. The instructor said, if you are not equipped, trying to cross the La Durance is impossible. It's over in 5 minutes. I skipped this one. But the public and official discourse put quite systematically the responsibility on the people on the move themselves, not on the laws they pass and the impossible mission that they give to the personnel that has to execute these orders. A quite emblematic example is the declaration of Dominique Dufour, prefect of the Hautes-Alpes region, so Hautes-Alpes is where Blessing died. He stated in a radio interview, migrants who wish to cross the border are taking risks that are ill-considered and sometimes encouraged by the number of organizations. We are talking about people, so the migrants, who, whatever difficulties they may have gone through in life, come from Italy when they get ready to enter France. So nothing justifies taking such an ill-considered risks to cross such difficult terrain as the Alps. And I finish with that. So while we clearly demonstrated, thanks to our counter-investigation, that Blessing died because she had been put at risk by gendarmes who followed contradictory orders given by their hierarchy, representatives of the state authority continue blaming migrants for taking too many risks while crossing such a difficult terrain. I would like to conclude my talk by quoting an interesting leaflet produced by the NGO Tous Migrants, a leaflet that they distribute to the border forces patrolling at the border area when they are there encountering them. The leaflet is entitled, quite emblematically, In the Name of the Law. And I quote one of the sentences. You, so you gendarme, you border guard, have the right, and it is even your duty, to refuse to carry out an illegal order if this would put others in danger. An exiled person has the right to cross French territory with dignity, without fear for his or her physical integrity. By saying so, they try to make them aware that there are legal dispositions that regulate the border passages, which are higher than the one contained in their impossible mission. Thank you. Sure. And I have some images.
Well, thank you, Filippo, for that introduction. And I'm really happy to be here. I wasn't in any of the other programs, but I hope to learn from everyone today about forensics, or today in the next few days. So this paper is called Media Forensics of Death on the US-Mexico Border, but it's really about sort of the forensics of the deadly infrastructure on the US-Mexico border. And I'll talk also about a very specific case and a specific location. So I'm talking about a place called Douglas, Arizona, which actually has become quite celebrated recently because every single candidate for the US presidency and vice presidency has been traversing this territory in Douglas. So Douglas, Arizona is a small town in Cochise County near the US-Mexico border, and it was once home to a smelter for the copper unearthed in nearby Bisbee. In Douglas's heyday, it was known for its cultural offerings. It boasted numerous theaters that comprised an entertainment district for the nearby military posts and mining operations. The smelter shuttered in 1987 with the cessation of mining, while the border security industry at the port of entry at Douglas expanded, casting its long shadow over the town. So of late, as I mentioned before, Cochise County and Douglas is a favored campaign stop ahead of the 2024 US presidential elections, since Arizona is actually the only battleground state that's on the border. So you win Arizona, and it's a very important state to gain the presidency. So while copper mining has waned, Douglas continues to draw new residents, many artists for the low cost of living and temperate climate, much like its neighboring and a more costly and touristy town of Bisbee. The southern edge of the town is delimited by the border wall that abuts Agua Prieta in Mexico, and was recently augmented to become taller, more formidable as part of the Trump administration's border policy. So this is just to give you a sense of the height of the wall, the kind of dizzying effect of being so close to it. And many of these images I took while I was traversing that territory. And I was in a white Prius driving down the road, and it took literally seconds for me to be slow chased by the Border Patrol. So that's just a setup idea around temporality and security, and I'll talk more about that. So a self-published former Customs and Border Protection agent, Mike Ligon, notes that Douglas is the most, quote, law enforcement saturated sector of the US-Mexico border. Indeed, it's a port of entry replete with enforcement measures, security architecture, and surveillance technologies. Like much of the US-Mexico border, it's a place that is hyper-visible and under permanent surveillance. So the case I'll talk about happened in the spring of 2022. The news media and members of the Douglas and Bisbee communities reported that a woman from Hermosillo in Sonora, Mexico, Griselda Verduzco Armenta, attempted to climb the border wall near Douglas and became entangled in climbing gear and, according to The Guardian, quote, hung upside down for a significant amount of time, leading to her death by asphyxiation. She was left to die by those who traveled with her and perhaps by agents on the scene and behind the cameras directed at the wall. So though the details surrounding her death are murky, her fate and story aligns with so many others along the border in which the alibi, as you're talking about, of the humanitarian state conceals the work of its brutal security infrastructure. So moreover, in the current state of the surveillance regime at the border, the permanent visibility at the nation's edge obviates assertions that her accident was not seen or that interventions were deployed as expeditiously as possible. In many other similar circumstances, migrants are seen but left to suffer and die unless they are attended to by various emergency services, mostly the fire department, the Cochise County Search and Rescue Posse, which is under the county sheriff's office, to Border Patrol trained EMTs. And this is significant because of the status of county sheriffs in the United States. So Mark Daniels, the county Cochise County Sheriff commented that, quote, "These types of incidents," about this incident, "are not political. They are humanitarian realities that someone has lost a loved one in a senseless tragedy." But the humanitarian gloss of this statement gives way to the security priorities of the U.S. as he goes on to say, quote, "We have to do better in finding solutions to the challenges facing our border, and we have to do it for the right reasons. Regardless of opinions, it is the facts that should direct our progress, and we will keep working towards a shared goal of border safety and security." But there's a hidden ideological bend in the statement. Daniels is part of the far-right constitutional sheriffs movement, who erroneously, I should state, regard county sheriffs as the highest law of the land. And there's a recent book called Highest Law of the Land about this. So they believe that they're responsible for upholding the US Constitution beyond any other legal entity. So Daniels, in his frequent appearances in far-right wing media, perpetrates anti-immigrant rhetoric couched in ideas about chaos and crisis at the border. And this is a constant refrain about the crisis at the border, and it's really circulating a lot now during the presidential election. He's linked to a number of anti-immigrant groups, including FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform, which has been labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Moreover, the border is, of course, not without robust security and surveillance infrastructure, in which safety is not a primary concern unless it's safety for Border Patrol agents. So numerous technologies, and this is just an image of that border along Douglas and the road alongside it. And along with the augmentation of the wall, all of this border security technology was applied, mostly lights and cameras and IFT towers. And then some of it is not completed. So there's some concrete platforms on which there are not yet lights. A lot of technologies have been applied to the border at Douglas, from cameras, IFTs that comprise the entire integrated security regime along that stretch of the border. So Douglas offers a close view of the interplay of technologies and techniques of border surveillance and the latter's role in destroying life. Yet the abundant surveillance technology on the US side was not sufficient to attend to this accident. Instead, Mexican emergency dispatchers contacted authorities in Douglas, who contacted the sheriff's office and sent Border Patrol agents and local emergency services. So without witness testimony or visual data, the forensic study of this case is limited by available information, including the body of the deceased, media accounts and actions, communications, and the design and location of deadly security and surveillance infrastructure at the border. In short, the entire apparatus of power that includes the technology, barriers, agents on the ground, elected officials, and their proxies. In this case, media forensics involves analysis of the media of surveillance infrastructure in its capacities, capabilities, and reach to assess what can be seen, where, and by what means. So forensics, which we don't really need a definition of, but I'm going to hone in on something particular to it. So it's from the Latin forensis, meaning pertaining to the courts, referring to the forms of inquiry used to determine social standing and belonging in adjudicating criminal offenses, particularly in the case of death and its moral attribution. In the medieval law of Deodand, if an object kills a person, that object must be transferred to God or the representative of God on earth, the crown. Thusly, Michael Ralph, drawing on the application of this law to chattel slavery, argues that every theory of forensics is a theory of capital and is key to understanding how capital functions. Quote, "Forensics in its histories and present uses, its implications for theories of subjectivity and models of liberal governance, its valence as a fortune and fate, is essential to understand how capital works," end quote. Indeed, another angle of the capital accumulation attendant to the science of forensics is its industry and the industries upon which it depends, in this case, the border security infrastructure. This discovery of the cause and culpability in cases of fatality and accidents is big business For Paul Virilio, citing Freud, he notes that accumulation puts an end to the impression of chance. The accident and outcome of modernity is no longer an unexpected event. At the border, accidents are not an outcome of chance. They're part of patterns, as you noted. They're anticipated, even planned, as part of its infrastructural design. So I'm arguing that it's planned rather than a series of accidents. So again, to quote Wiseman, forensics investigations are image-based practices, and the investigator, quote, must be able to see and know more than the perpetrator. In the case of state violence, the state's the perpetrator, who to quote Wiseman, the perpetrator who has access to better optics, data, and information than the investigators. Thus, we have to engage what you've already described as a counterforensics, a term coined by Alan Sukala, who does a lot of work on the sea, as you were describing, or the condition of, quote, structural inequality in access to vision, signals, and knowledge, to find ways to operate close to and under the, as you described also, the threshold of detectability. It also calls into question the locus of violence, its disavowal, and who bears the burden of proof. He calls this part of counterforensics, or the process of seeking information despite limitations. In this atmosphere of total surveillance, speed is of utmost importance. It is speed that increases the odds of an accident occurring and that increases the odds of escaping detection. Thus, migrants attempting to cross or climb quickly under the watchful eye of Border Patrol to outpace interdiction efforts. So the emphasis on expediency and speed doesn't square with Border Patrol delay, leaving this woman hanging for hours. And again, this was the talk of the town. I spend part of my time in Bisbee, and everybody was talking about this, how long it took and how long she was hanging there. So unless the latter is an intentional stall and a refusal intended to ensure harm and injury unto death. So Griselda's death was deemed an accident, a term which, drawing from the Latin root of the word ad cadere, or to fall out, to fall upon, happen upon, suggests chance and misfortune, a fate that occurs without fault, without purposiveness. Virilio's meditation on the accident suggests otherwise, that it's a condition of modernity, a consequence of speed and the onslaught of technological progress. Accidents don't just happen, but are symptoms of how culture moves, evinced in the Silicon Valley motto to move fast and break things. They are an anticipated outcome of progress. So for Greg Siegel, whose work on media forensics focuses on accidents, for him, accidents occasion technological analysis to discover the origin or source of failure to prevent further mishap. He turns to the example of the plane crash as an emblem of the accidents of accelerated modernity, or as the origin of forensics of reconstruction and mediation. So the plane's black box is part of forensic media. He draws on Paul Virilio's work on the accident and the idea that the study of the accident is an archaeotechnological invention, so that, quote, to invent the sailing ship or steamer is to invent the shipwreck. Likewise, border barriers are inventions of the nation state that invent the deadly fall from heights, just as surveillance technology at borders are also inventions of modernity that invents the need to transit with speed to avoid detection. So technological progress creates accidents that themselves reveal the substance of the invention or what lies beneath it. The accident is replete with meaning, a symbolic event. Its aftermath is as significant as its cause. So with speed comes security, or the need to secure the circulation of capital in modernity, which becomes its own form of capital circulation and accumulation. The acceleration of capitalism through globalization demanded the invention of technological forms of security. The security and surveillance infrastructure at the US-Mexico border is part of the defensive architecture of modernity that serves to control mobility. However, the accidents that occur as a result of these technologies are part of the infrastructural design. They are seen and known, but forensic analysis is not part of INS policy. which would imply a desire to seek remedy. But this is not the case. Rather, injury and death are intended for their deterrent effects. Death at the border in the US is part of the prevention through deterrence policy that weaponizes the dangerous desert landscape, moving people into the desert away from cities in order for them to essentially die in the desert. So migrant bodies are sacrificed to the border machinery. They're not the vulnerable or protected bodies of forensic cases. There is no impetus for seeking understanding, performing analysis, or learning from injurious and otherwise dangerous security and surveillance infrastructure. Not all accidents are deemed worthy of investigation and subsequently worthy of prevention, particularly when they are part of policy and design. So barriers in surveillance technologies are outcomes of accelerated modernity as parts of the infrastructure of the control of mobility that speeds up, enables, and expands human capacity for hindering, sensing, and knowing all that traverses a nation's boundaries. Accidents are part of the outcome of the security apparatus in operation. The wall denotes the invention of the modern state. The latter exists and survives by exclusion, by defining what it is against the foreigner, all that appears outside its walls. So we can extrapolate from the kinds of technologies present at the border that there is sufficient visual data, not just from the ubiquitous cameras and surveillance technology, but also from witnesses, border agents, and other migrants on the scene. So the place where I was just taking pictures, I didn't even leave the car, I just took them from the window, so you might even see reflections of me. And this is Mark Daniels, the county sheriff. But that's the place where Griselda had climbed over the wall and was left hanging. It literally took minutes for agents to trail me. Media forensics of migrant death on the US-Mexico border is limited to speculation and mediated accounts to reconstruct the scene of death. What remains is the injured or denatured body. The injured body signifies many things. It is a sign that harmful policies have been enacted. I'll keep it on here, so you don't have to look at him much longer. And it's a sign for the state that a crime has taken place. Didier Fasson notes how the body is taken as the site of evidence to bolster asylum claims. The traces of violence upon body and mind through physical signs of injury and trauma, medical certificates, and psychological assessments are used as evidence in petitions for asylum. Yet not all evidence of trauma has the same political valence. Eva Giosanite, in her work on migrants at the US-Mexico border, literally in the same location in Douglas, notes how the same physical evidence is used against undocumented migrants as signs that a crime has taken place, that a migrant has traversed hostile and weaponized terrain and has the battle scars that prove it, that prove unlawful trespass. Moreover, EMT services are integrated into the policing and security infrastructure, since these services are reliant on the more robust county sheriff or border patrol infrastructure, or are directly part of its border patrol trained EMT. So you have agents working both in interdiction and as EMT. So Giosanite notes that in the Tucson sector that includes Douglas and Bisbee, hundreds of agents are trained as EMT. In a report called Left to Die by Southern Arizona-based No More Deaths, they note that the Border Patrol has a, quote, monopoly over search and rescue that makes it difficult for other emergency response teams to intervene. They investigate Border Patrol, what they call, quote, deadly non-response and high failure rates, which they trace back to institutional culture of discrimination and racial animus. Their report echoes what Achille Membe describes as the necropolitics of state power, not just to foster life, but to let some populations wither and die, while describing the state monopoly over both violence and the emergency services designed to respond to it. So I'll kind of quickly run through the next part. So in the case of Griselda, the black box of the forensic analysis is located in the very operations of the Border Patrol. So we don't have access to that. All we have access to is the lag time. The media, news media, and publicly available information about border surveillance provides clues about the unfolding of this accident. People were commenting, oh, is it captured by surveillance cameras? And we know that it was, just based on not just these surveillance cameras, but the ones at the Border Patrol station very close by. There is an RVSS tower in Douglas, and there has been since 2015, installed by General Dynamics. And they made a press release talking about that technology and saying that you could see 7.5 miles out. And the technology is comprised of multi-pronged all-seeing cameras located on both towers and building structures. And the addition of these cameras on the lights are also evidence. And I won't read through the description of this RVSS program. And the reports from the government's accountability office that says, there is sufficient viewing along the border in this sector. But what I also wanted to talk about is that there is another site of omniscience on the border, and it's the compound of Warren Buffett, who renowned investor, Warren Buffett's son, Howard Buffett, and in the middle there. And Howard Buffett boasts more surveillance equipment than the police and border patrol units that he supports and supplies along the border in Douglas. And his public persona is just that of a rogue cowboy of Western lore who helps the Arizona Rangers defend the state and the nation. He's part of the elite class of ultra-wealthy citizens capable of supplementing state power. So according to Bo Hedai's investigations, he skirted laws by donating, instead of donating to the Border Patrol, he donated to the sheriff's office, who then gave it to the Border Patrol. He also has a compound that has cameras on 100-foot towers that also are aimed at that section of the wall. So there's so many people that saw this event happen and did nothing. According to the Facebook posts by the sheriff's office, her remains were found off International Road and Kings Highway, which is exactly, and this is the Border Patrol station, or this is Howard Buffett's compound. You can see the tower, or Howard Buffett's son. And this is a map of where the event took place and the Border Patrol station. And these cameras can see 8 miles out, and this is a little less than 1.5 miles from the Border Patrol station on Kings Highway. So again, there's a map by the Electronic Frontier Foundation Surveillance Tower Map that locates all of the towers along this section, and there are many. So to conclude, the border under surveillance is a site of obscene violence. Really violence that should be off-scene, that is seen, that's seen by many and seen by many cameras. Violence that's hyper-visible, mediated, and transmitted globally. The border security infrastructure, both natural and built, includes the interaction of border architectures and environment, the security and surveillance infrastructure, and agents on the scene and watching behind cameras. The entire infrastructure at the border, installed to facilitate access and trade, to hinder and process migrants and travelers, to watch, detain, and arrest, is a complex machinery and apparatus that enacts and allows violence. This violence is embedded in the design of the built environment, and it animates the infrastructure of security and emergency agents, from emergency response teams to Border Patrol, all the way up to the purported highest law of the land, the county sheriff. So the border security ecosystem, for the most part, is available to public knowledge, such that we might reconstruct the capacity for apprehension and extrapolate reasonable emergency response times against the improbable accidental lag or delay. In this case, the design of the system, the capacity for rapid response and arrest, provides damning evidence that the system is designed for maximum harm and injury to those who trespass. Thank you.
10h50, no? 54. So we can try to have a short conversation. I would like just to open, if it's possible, just saying, to Cristina, we discussed it before, but a question about the capacity to anticipate. Is it possible to learn, train a little bit the people working on the border, try to collect evidences, data, etc., just to be ready to anticipate, because we know that it's very hard to catch evidence and information after, because the system of the visibility is stretching. And the second is more for you, but it's it's about the visibility, invisibilization. I would like just to mention, it's not a question, but during the massacre of Nador in June 24th, 2 years ago, with 24 victims and more or less 50 people missing, Nador, so the border between Spain and Morocco, when the Border Forensic Agency asked to the Spanish surveillance the images of the drone, they said, I'm sorry, exactly at the moment that you're asking, the drone was back to recharge the battery.
Well, yeah, I think it is, and it is really somehow, I think the difference between my case or the case we investigated and your cases is that at the Alpine border there are no images, so there are no images at all. And so what we tried to do, it was to generate the missing images in order to prove the violence. And yes, I think it's possible to probably to train people, but it's a lot of work to do it. But we are trying to see how we could do it at the Croatian-Slovenian border, because we have one testimony, one inhabitant that it's a river there as well, where the people mostly die, and there is one, one inhabitant, one resident there that is just, has the house just in front of the river, and probably, with her it's possible to do something, but you need energy and time, and how to do it, how to archive. There's a wonderful work that has been done by Chora Makaremi on Iran as well, on how to archive images and try to make it. It depends as well what you want to do with these images and with this proof. Do you want to go in front of a tribunal and have a trial, or do you want to have something more like people's tribunal? And then the question of how do you prepare the proof? It's different. So just short.
Yeah, I think the contradiction in that case is this idea that this space is, especially the US-Mexico border, is hyper visible, but nobody can get those images. And I bring up the idea of the town because there's a whisper campaign. Everybody knows, and everyone knows that this infrastructure is there to facilitate violence, and that you're living in this kind of militarized zone, and you can't even stop to take pictures. And so it's this kind of, it's a form of fascism. But of course, then all the candidates have to go there and take their picture by that section of the fence. And so I think it's this very contradictory space of visibility. And it's up to activists and others to kind of flood the zone in a sense.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm wondering about the forensic architecture, and I want to know the influence of militant about building this kind of architecture. I know the decision to build it. I know they have to do it by law, something like some kind of thing like that. I want to know if the militant people, as we see in the mountain between French and Italy or here, and some militant people, how they can to make the influence to make this kind of attitude be a kind of reality, because I know it's not easy to get the approbation of a lot of people. How is there a strong relationship? Do you study that, or that's what I want to know? Thank you.
Well, I mean, it depends on the region where you are and where you are operating. But for example, at the Italian-French border in the Briançon region, there's a lot of people even taking. It was possible as well to make this map where you had to have a look a bit with details, on how we try to make how to map the all the violence and all the terrain of the violence in the region. It was done by, actually, thanks to people who are there every night trying to rescue migrants who are lost in the mountain, and the NGOs there as well were trying to collect all the information. So it was really useful for us. Actually, Sarah Bachelry, who contributed to the counter investigation with me and the others, did her master field work there during the winter 2017-2018 by being a volunteer as well for the association, and thanks to that we could have a lot of information on that. But for me, it's again and always the same question is as well how we structure all this information in order to make it possible that is usable somehow, in order to, and again, for me, I think it's really important to have this link between this direct violence, what Galtung said, direct violence and structural systemic violence, and to get this structural violence, we need a lot of people, but we need a lot of people trying to get information which is codified in a way that is can be used as well in order to make this counter forensics or forensic architecture approach. For me, one of the main, I don't know, difficulties, if we were to say about the approach, is that it needs a lot of knowledge, lot of, in order to make maps. We produce videos and so on. It's a lot of, it's a lot of work to have this information that can come from below to be structured in a way that is possible to be used either to asking truth and justice in real tribunals or in something else. But this is the work as well that is, for me, the limits as well of the approach is that it needs so much resources to do that. And but this is
There's part of your question that was about military, is that?
Also, militant people. We see a lot of people with a gun. How is there a relationship between that and the building of this kind of architecture? Because for me, it's also wondering how possible. I know there's a lot of people conservative, but there's a relationship between that with the decision of politics to build it. There's a strong how much they can.
In some ways, is there resistance? So I'll give an example. So in Arizona, there was a governor who put a wall up made out of shipping containers, and I have a chapter about like the shipping container and that history. And the federal government made him take it down. But what people didn't see is the amount of activists that showed up every single day and put their bodies where those shipping containers were supposed to be. And so they put their bodies on the line. People were seeing that. They were stopping the work from happening. And I think that signaled to the federal government that actually, you know, the place where those shipping containers were was a strip of federal land that the state didn't have any right or authority to place those barriers on. It was going to be a shipping container wall. And so I think in that sense, there is impact, but it takes a long time. And I think that's just one example, but another example might be that you were talking about mapping, and there's a mapping project of finding all of the places where migrants have died in the desert, and No More Deaths, which is an activist group, uses that same map to place water where dead bodies have accumulated, where there's a concentration of death. And so I think there's so much work that's being done that is countering the sort of violence of the state. Whether it has impact is unclear sometimes. Thank you.
One last question and then...
I don't think it's really a question, said Bolton from the last project, but more continuing what you were just saying then, that to put yourself out there doing counter forensics or humanitarian work or human rights defense has become equally dangerous and potentially fatal. And, you know, we're familiar with aspects of that work on the Nogales border in the Sonora Desert, where we were out doing precisely that with a group, the Samaritans, at 4:30 in the morning, not just because it was the coolest part of the day, but because it became very, very risky to be out later before the border patrols were going around slashing the water bottles. And increasingly you see this in all theatres of, you know, border, let's say, border violence now, where the human rights defenders are equally as at risk in some ways, particularly the ones who, not the larger symbolic actions, but the ones who need to go out and catalogue and take provisions. We see that wherever we are, whether that's Lesbos, whether it's on the Spanish border, whether it's in the Marais around Calais. The human rights workers are really, really at risk in order to try to compile that evidence.